Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Akiona Law podcast, wherein we talk about anything and everything that intersects in the areas of family law and divorce. And today I'm excited to have with me licensed mental health counselor, Caroline Plummer. Caroline, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Lonnie. Thank you for having me.
Okay, and before we get started, let me tell you a little bit more about Caroline. So, again, she's a licensed mental health counselor. She provides therapy to individuals, children, couples, and families. She serves on the board of the AFCC Washington chapter, which stands for, oh gosh, I just had it and I just lost it. um, Associated
Association
Association
of
Fam-
Family Conciliation Courts. I know it's
Right.
a mouthful.
Association of Family and Conciliation Courts. It's a great association to belong to. It teaches you how to resolve high conflict cases. I always love their continuing legal education classes. Caroline, she follows the AFCC guidelines in her work. She has certifications and trainings in several therapeutic interventions, including extensive training in parent-child contact problems. And she is certified in parent-child interaction therapy, PCIT for short, and she teaches caregivers positive parenting tools to decrease the children's disruptive behaviors. Now, her work focus is working with other attorneys and professionals in the legal system in both high conflict family law cases and non-divorce related cases. And she also works as a parenting coordinator as well in the family law non-divorce type cases or divorce cases. And she frequently leads a team of therapists to intervene in cases such as where there's problems going on with the parent and child, such as resist, refuse cases. Caroline, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you so much. And I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Great.
So, what I'm excited to talk about and what you all need to listen to again is Caroline is an expert in the resist, refuse child dynamics, or it's called PCCP, which stands for Parent Child Contact Problem. Caroline, can you give us, like, even for the general listeners or those attorneys, legal professionals newer to this area, what is cases that involve parent-child contact problems? What is that resist refuse dynamic?
So, good question. And these are dynamics that happen frequently in high conflict divorce cases where there's a lot of polarization between the caregivers, and often cases involving high litigation, because the more litigation, the more polarization there is between the parents, the more that the children get pulled into that polarization. So often what happens is children in these cases sort of get sucked up into the conflict and they'll align with one parent.
Hmm.
And we call that parent the favored parent. And then they'll resist, reject the other parent. And we call that the rejected parent or the non-favored parent.
Okay. Um, and now, wasn't this termed parental alienation back in the day?
Yes, it was. And I think we still do talk about
Okay.
alienating behaviors. We do still talk about that, and those can still exist. But we also, there's a much broader model now that we use to
Mhm.
assess these resist refuse dynamics in these cases, because they often involve multiple factors.
Okay.
And I do have a
Oh,
diagram for that if you'd like me to show it at this time.
perfect. Let's take a look at that. And
Okay.
I'm afraid for those you who are listening to this on a podcast, you're going to have to come and actually watch out this recording on our Akiona Law YouTube channel so you can see Caroline's slides.
Yes, and I'm looking for them right now. Okay. Okay, is this showing up for you, Lonnie?
Yeah, I'm seeing factors contributing
Yeah,
to
there it is.
sustained
Good. I
parent.
just wanted,
Yeah,
So this is called the multifactorial model. This is
okay.
a very, I would say this is the most current model to assess parent-child contact problems. And the key point that this model shows is that the there's all of these factors. You can see here, child's response in the middle, right? That would
Okay.
be, for example, the child resisting contact with one parent. That's what they're talking about. So you can see that there's a multitude of factors that influence this resist refuse dynamic. It's not just the rejected parent. That used to be the old model. You
Hmm.
know, that the rejected parent, they would put the therapeutic intervention would focus on the rejected parent and the child. That is not effective at all. It never was, because the all of these factors really need to be assessed and addressed. So for example, just taking a couple, the child's age is a factor. A 14-year-old is going to be much more difficult to
Hmm.
work with on these resist refuse dynamics than a 7-year-old, right? Because teens are individuating from authority. They don't like to really follow anybody's rules. So when we get a teen, we have to handle the intervention differently than we would if we get a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old. That's one example. You can see that the personality of the aligned or favored parent also needs to be assessed. The aligned parent's parenting. So, for example, when we do these cases and do the assessment, I always look at what kind of parenting style does favored parent, aligned parent use? What kind of parenting style does the rejected parent use? See down here? And so if the favored parent is using a permissive parenting style
Okay.
where sort of anything goes,
Yeah.
and the rejected parent is using more of a authoritative or
Mm.
authoritarian style, you can see how hard that is to intervene, because basically what happens if you've got a permissive parent with a child
Hmm.
versus a parent that's more strict, who do you think
Hmm.
the child's going to be aligned more with,
Right, the
right?
permissive.
The permissive. So one of the things we do in these cases is we try to get both parents to move towards the gold standard parenting style, which is authoritative, which is a combination of warmth, nurturing, but also boundaries, structure, a certain level of what we call demandingness. So that's another example of, part of the assessment. And you basically have to go through all of these factors and address them, which is why these cases are so complex.
Okay. So just to kind of break it down here, in terms of okay, so we're talking about the intervention. We're talking about maybe the court system or legal professionals intervening with a child who doesn't want to see a parent. And the professionals are trying to come together and you're trying to look at, okay, let's just say the parent is aligned with mom. No, let's just say the child is aligned with mom and the child doesn't want to see dad. And so the professionals are coming in and saying, well, it's not healthy for a child to reject seeing their father. Because that child needs to have their dad in their lives, whatever, have some sort of contact. And you may have moms saying, well, I try to get kid to go on the visit. And I know you mostly see this. I see this mostly a lot with the teenagers. Well, I try to get my 14-year-old to go on the visit, but he doesn't want to. And what can I do? I can't force him. What do you say to that?
Well, what you say is what we say is, and this is also what the experts say, like Bill Eddy and you know, a lot of the experts who do high conflict work, they say, do you get your child to go to school? Do
Mm,
you get your child, are you able to get your child to go to the dentist? You
yeah.
know, and so it's, you know, we sort of challenge that, like, you know, it's, you know, really it's your responsibility to get your child to comply, right? If you're
Mhm.
the parent, you need to get your child to comply. And that really, that responsibility is really on you. And, you know, if you're able to get your child to go to bed or obey a curfew or get to school, then certainly having a relationship with their other parent has is equally, if not much more important than those other things that you're able to get your child to do.
Okay. And what is this? I see in the slides you have up, it looks like you have something that says humiliating separation.
Yeah. So, you know, these are, I mean, the whole humiliating separation, intense marital conflict, lack of functional co-parenting, divorce, conflict, and litigation, all of these aligned professionals, education, health, and legal, these are all things that can contribute to the additional resist refuse problems. So the more sort of conflictual and high conflict the divorce and separation is, divorce is, the worse it is to intervene in these cases. And the other big thing that those of us who are doing these cases now really, for example, right here in this quadrant or this square, aligned professionals, health, education, health, and legal, I when I start assessing the case, I
Mhm.
always talk to the attorneys involved, and I
Yeah.
actually send out a sort of a, you know, this is what I, if you want me to take this case, then I need you both, I need the attorneys to decrease litigation
Ah,
and calm it down, because we can't do these cases if there's really high litigation,
yeah.
because litigation just creates conflict, and that
Right.
definitely spills down to the children and that polarization that I talked about earlier.
Yeah, I'm just kind of thinking in my head I'm thinking in my head examples where you have and as attorneys we do this all the time. We can't help it unless you've gotten some training from the AFCC where
Right,
you align yourself with your client and you almost say, well, I talked to mom. Mom
right,
said the kid doesn't
right,
want to see dad. That's,
right,
mom tried. Or, and this used to be back in the day, like 10 years ago, where we would have the child see a counselor, and the counselor would then determine whether or not the child should start seeing the rejected parent. And the counselor would then say, well, I spoke with the child and the child doesn't want to see dad.
right, right.
And then
Yeah,
dad's like, what do I
that's
do?
yeah, and that still happens, believe it or not. And
Yeah, I
that
believe it.
that is very that's another thing, that's where that you're talking about, Lonnie, is this aligned professionals right here. You
Yeah,
know, when you've got a therapist
yeah.
that is aligned solely with their client, they're working in a silo. They're
Mm,
not, you know, according to AFCC guidelines, going back to that, any court involved therapist really needs to be looking at the entire family system and considering multiple hypotheses and not working in a silo. So,
mhm.
for example, now cases, especially moderate to severe cases of parent child contact problems that I do parent coordination on, I actually only will do it if I can handpick a team
Okay.
of, you know, and ideally the team involves a therapist for each parent as well as the child. And this is a lot of professionals, it's expensive, and again, this is for more severe cases, but really you need the therapist involved in this process to not only work for, and you know, their client and advocate for their client, you also need them to advocate and support those family members to support the court order and the reunification,
Mhm.
right? They have to be able to do both.
Mhm.
So that's very key.
And now, how does this align with, like, in Snohomish County, we tend to use guardian ad litems a lot,
Yeah.
GALs over parenting coordinators or even your parenting evaluators. So how do you do it? Let's say you have a guardian ad litem and then you have a parenting coordinator PC such as yourself. Would
Yeah.
you, the PC, because you see, you've seen it, like good GALs do not align themselves with either, but you see it in cases where you see a GAL aligning with a parent. Would you, as a PC, parenting coordinator, step in and say, hey, GAL, you're aligning yourself with the favored parent, and maybe you should be considering X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, it's a tricky one because um it's a tricky one because you have
Okay.
to be careful of how you do that. But
Yeah.
in general, I guess what I would say is that I've worked with several GALs who are great at what they do,
Yeah.
and they aren't educated in how to
Right.
handle parent-child contact problems.
Right.
So a lot of times what I'm doing as a PC is
Uh-huh.
educating the
Okay.
GAL on how to do the case, which, quite frankly, is a lot of work, right? And
I
so,
bet.
one of the things that we're trying to do with the people who do these cases are, you know, are educate the GALs for sure, and
Okay.
also, you end up having GALs who understand how to do the case, and so you kind of, you're like, if y- if you have a choice of working with a GAL who understands PCCP and one who doesn't, you're going to work with one who does, right?
Okay.
So it's a combination of educating the GALs, attorneys, you know, the parent evaluators in some cases.
Mm,
They need a lot of the parent evaluators don't have a lot of training in PCCP cases either.
mm.
There's a couple that do have good training, but many do not.
Okay. Okay, okay, you have mentioned, so we're talking about PCCP again, which stands for the
Parent child,
parent-child contact problems. And you
correct,
had mentioned earlier about there's different types of levels. There's moderate and severe. Can you go into
right.
that?
Sure. I'm going to get this one off the
Okay.
screen. Yes. So the experts on these cases, these parent-child contact problem cases, have come up with a kind of an assessment where you're based upon certain behaviors, resist,
Mhm,
refuse behaviors, and there's like a
mhm,
whole list of them.
mhm.
You kind of grade the uh resist refuse dynamic as mild, moderate, or severe, right? So, for example, an example of mild resist refuse would be the child's going to see the non-preferred parent. They're doing the visitation. They're having some interaction, but maybe they're coming back to the favored parent's home and they're complaining a lot about the rejected parent, and they're starting to say things like, I really don't want to go.
Okay.
I really don't, it's that type of thing. They're still going, but they're starting to develop some resistance. That's would be considered a mild case.
Okay.
Now, to it's very important, and some of the good parent evaluators out there who really understand, and GALs who really understand parent-child contact problem cases, when they start seeing that in their evaluation,
Mhm.
they will like put in an intervention to kind of combat that resist refuse dynamic right away,
Okay.
right? And that's really important because you want to catch these resist refuse dynamics on the front end, because the worse they get, the
Yeah.
harder they are to change. So an example of a severe case
Okay.
would be a child saying, I don't want to go. I'm not going.
Yep.
And they're refusing to go. I mean, I have a case right now that I am grading as severe because even though the child's going, it's with a lot of work and the child is not talking to the rejected parent at all during the
Mm.
contact.
Not
So
not at all. So the
not at all.
child is at the visit and not speaking
Yeah,
with the objective parent at all.
correct.
Wow.
And that's with a lot of therapeutic support.
Wow.
I mean, that's with a lot of therapeutic support. So, that's going to be, it's a 13-year-old, right?
Ah,
So you've got a lot of things, and here's the other thing. This child had no contact with the father, in this case, the rejected parent, for almost 2 years.
ooh,
So the longer the more
wow.
you have no contact, the harder it is
Um,
to put these cases together. So one of the things we really recommend is, like, if there's any kind of safety issue, obviously that needs to be assessed. But even with a safety issue, you can still do supervised visits. And that contact with a supervisor still gives that child and the rejected parent the ability to stay connected. And that is a really good way to keep some kind of contact going
mhm,
until maybe a parent evaluation is done, which
mhm.
can take 5, 6 months, right?
Right.
So, getting that contact going, even if it's supervised, is really important.
And would an example be like maybe 4 to 6 months of minimal contact where the rejected parent child shows up at the visit and just basically says, I'm not going, and just sits in the car or
That would be an example of more like a severe,
oh,
right?
okay.
A severe resist refuse
Mm,
dynamic. Yeah. And those are hard. Those are really, really hard. I mean, one of the
mm,
things that I really want to start doing, and I do a consultation with 4 other highly trained therapists in this area. We consult twice a month on these cases. And one of the things we're really starting to think about doing more is, how do we rule out the cases that really just don't have a very high high chance of working, because and which ones do we take and which ones do we say we can't take? That's kind of where the next step for me is,
mm,
like, because it's such a tremendous amount of time and resources,
mm,
right, to
right.
do these cases. They're very, very involved. And, there's definitely certain factors that make these cases less likely to succeed. And I think we're doing the client, and ourselves and honestly the community a disservice when we're taking a case that does not have a high chance of succeeding.
Okay. So could you give us an example of a moderate resist and refuse case?
Sure. I would say moderate would be something like, the child may be going to the visit, but not interacting very much
Ah,
with the
okay.
rejected parent.
Okay.
Or sometimes the child goes and sometimes the child says, I don't want to go,
Oh,
right?
okay.
That would be kind of a moderate
Okay.
example. Hmm.
Okay. Well, Caroline, how do we set up these parent-child contact problem cases for success?
So what we want to do with that is, number one, you need providers that are trained,
Okay.
in this area. Because if you don't have trained providers, you actually can do more harm than good.
Mm,
Because one of the things that we know is that a failed intervention on cases like this makes it very, very hard to have a successful intervention after a failed intervention. So because when it fails, the polarization and the resist refuse dynamic is just becoming more entrenched, and it's hard to break through that. So really the best way to set these cases up for success is, number one, to have parent evaluators and GALs be able to see if there's a dynamic, first of all, to, like, if it's mild, to be able to put recommendations in their reports
mhm.
that, this is a mild, we're starting to see some resist
Yeah.
refuse, and this needs to be addressed right away before it gets worse. For example, I had a mild case a couple years back where the children who were resisting the father a little bit, and the parent evaluator understood resist refuse, and she put in a, you know, she put in that it was happening and that it needed intervention. And she also did give the PC in this case, which is the role I took, the authority to make temporary custody change, and
Mm,
if the dynamic didn't decrease. And that
wow.
actually sounds really severe,
Yeah.
and it's highly effective. It's
Wait,
highly effective.
wait, did you say the court gave you the authority as a parenting coordinator PC to change you said the custody?
Temporarily.
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 Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, because the PC can't ever make a permanent
Right,
change.
right.
But they, in this case, because that is one of the interventions for these
Ah,
cases, is a
okay,
temporary
okay.
custody reversal. Because what has to happen is that there needs to be the pattern, the habits broken,
Yeah.
um, with limited contact with these more severe cases with the favored parent, and then a lot of contact with the rejected parent
Yeah.
with therapeutic support, because that gives the child exposure to be able to, you know, the child's kind of forced to be able to work through these conflicts
Right,
with the
right.
rejected parent, again, with therapeutic support. Um, and yeah, and so that is a recommendation in fact, let me just pull up another, see, here we go. Um, okay, here we go. So this slide's a little hard to see, but I'm going to expand it. So for example, you can see, by the way, okay, so first of all, this continuum was developed by Pollock and Fiedler, who are experts in you can see it right down there, Pollock and Fiedler. And this is basically, sorry about that, how you intervene in these cases. So for example, and I know it's hard to see, but you've got up at the top, you can see here, this is mild cases, this is moderate to severe, and this is most severe, okay? So basically what they've got, they have recommendations of the different types of intervention you can do depending upon the severity. Remember, we talked about mild, moderate, and
Right.
severe. Here they are. So you assess the severity and then
Okay.
you look at your treatment options. So, for example, you can see option one, moderate to severe cases of alienation and hybrid.
Okay.
So, option one, legal custody with rejected parent, interim suspension of contact with favored parent, detailed court order, or no intervention. Option two, favored parent attends individual intensive psychoeducational intervention.
Mm,
Option three is a combination. So, you know, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but
okay.
I'm trying to educate judges, and when I get in front of a judge and I'm asked to do a report or I'm doing a status hearing, I'm educating these judges now on this model,
Yeah.
because it's very important that they understand that this is what the experts are recommending. And, you know, I think a lot of times you don't have to go to a temporary custody reversal.
Okay.
However, what I will say is that if a good evaluator sees a resist refuse dynamic developing and they put in their parenting or in their recommendations, which makes it into a parenting plan, that the PC can make a temporary custody change, that really helps keep everybody accountable. And one of the big things about these cases is accountability and
Yeah.
strong judicial oversight.
Strong judicial oversight. So that means like status review hearings every 2 to 3 months?
Yep.
What about
And now,
monthly? Monthly's too much?
I
Okay.
had one case last year where the judge wanted monthly status hearings for 4 months.
Wow.
Right now, I'm on a case where I requested the judge to give me a status hearing every other month for 3 months,
Yeah.
because it increases the accountability.
Yeah.
And also then when I go to the status hearing, I do a report and I make recommendations, and usually the judge supports those recommendations and they'll put them in a court order,
Mm.
right? And again, that just keeps it's clear, it keeps everybody accountable.
Okay. Yeah, no, it makes sense. In fact, I think I was just at a review hearing the other month, and of course, the other parent didn't do anything that the court ordered them to do at the last hearing about a month ago,
Yeah.
which is, they're supposed to do, the favored parent was supposed to do certain steps, and they
Yeah.
didn't. Okay.
Yeah.
So going back to that slide, there was this, not you had, the slide had like, and I believe it was the model for moderate, and one of the options was, okay, right, okay, thanks. So it was moderate to severe, option 2, favored parent attends individual intensive psychoeducational intervention. Okay, psychoeducational intervention is a very fancy word. What does that
Yeah.
mean? What are we talking about? What's an example?
Well, an example is that, first of all, you see it's the favored parent that needs to attend that, not the rejected parent. That's a key point,
Yeah.
okay? Because the favored parent is the key
Okay.
to the entire thing. The
Why?
favored parent has the most power and the
Okay.
most influence. And
Uh-huh.
if that favored parent isn't actively supporting
Mm.
the process, it's doomed,
Oh,
doomed. And so that's where we give the favored parent a lot of work. Again, why often the favored parent needs their own therapist who's part of a team who understands the importance of the child having a relationship with both parents. We give the favored parent a lot of education and therapy on how they can support the relationship with the other parent, why it's important. In some cases, it involves training the favored parent on how to increase their parenting style to more authoritative if they're permissive, like I talked about earlier. In
okay.
some cases, it's teaching the parent parenting skills on how to get a child to comply with their, with their direction and requirements, getting the parent to require more from the child,
Mm.
using behavioral incentives and consequences,
Mhm.
incentives if they do and consequences if they don't. Like, for example, get out of the car and go to the home of the rejected parent.
Right.
What's the consequence going to be, right? So a lot of it is, those are some examples of what intensive psychoeducational intervention is.
Okay. So it's not so much a class that they can take by the favored parent.
I mean, in some cases, if I had a favored parent that was really permissive,
Okay.
I might ask, I might appoint, because as a PC, I can appoint
Okay.
additional services. I might say, favored parent, you need to work with parent coach so and so,
Oh. Oh.
doing some in-home work with you so that you
Yeah.
can learn how to use to learn some positive discipline and parenting skills.
Okay. So it's not so much that the court says, hey, favored parent, see a therapist. The court actually has to say, see therapists 1, 2, 3, 4 who are trained in the parent-child contact problems.
Right. And usually the court
Okay.
doesn't usually know who,
Yeah, they don't know.
usually the PC, or a PC
Okay.
or a parent evaluator who understands these cases, they'll
Oh,
make the recommendation to the court, and
wow.
hopefully the court, follows those recommendations. I have found the court to
Okay.
follow my recommendations.
Okay. Okay. Um, let's see here. And I had a question and I lost it. And I hate it when that happens
Okay.
because it's such an interesting topic and I'm trying to keep all the questions in my head together. Um, okay, so we talked about, is there anything else that we may have missed in terms of the interventions that you use to treat these parent-child contact problem cases?
I mean, I think the final piece I would say, which is very important, is that often the rejected parent may have done some things that were, uh, insensitive, or, you know, I mean, I've worked cases with resist refuse dynamics where maybe the rejected parent has, is has relapsed from addiction, or has done some things during a relapse that were hurtful to the child. So a big part of this intervention is also teaching the rejected parent how to listen and validate the child's feelings of why they don't want to see them, and to learn how to make an apology, a sincere apology, and take responsibility for what they did that was wrong. So a lot of it's about that, because that relationship between the rejected parent and the child, usually there is a rupture, and that needs to be healed.
Hmm.
And that involves a lot of work with the rejected parent.
Okay.
So you see, it's a family systems intervention.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
working with the favored parent, the non-favored parent, and the children. Sometimes you're also working with a grandmother, or a nanny, because what happens is all these people get aligned and with one side, and they can kind of derail it. So you
Mm.
sometimes have to work with the entire family system to get everybody sort of on board to support this.
Okay. So let me ask you this question. So rather than the court saying, "Dad, you see a therapist, Mom, you need to see a therapist, child needs to be see a therapist," would you, as a parenting coordinator, would say, "Hey, I want mom, dad, and child to work with Susan Smith as a therapist because she is trained in these parent-child contact problems." Is
Yeah.
that how it's supposed to go?
Well, that's what I
Okay.
require. If
Okay.
I'm going to take a case, depending upon the severity, like on this, if it's a severe case, I'm going
Severe.
to
Yeah.
say to the
Hmm.
court, if they want me to take a case, or the
Yeah.
attorneys, I'm going to say, here's what I need to take this case.
Mm.
I lay it out, because, and I usually, after I do, before I make that recommendation, though, I'm requiring that I get to see any parent evaluation or
Mm.
GL report. I'm
Okay.
requiring that I see any relevant legal docs. I'm doing a review of the case. I'm
Okay.
doing an assessment. And then, also talking with the attorneys about what's going on. So I'm getting a lot of information and sort of doing an assessment on what's this case going to need to be successful? How can we set it up, to your first question
Yeah.
a few minutes ago. And
Yeah.
then often what I'm doing with that is, some of the people who really know what they're doing, they're calling me, or another person, another expert who does this, while they're developing their CR2A or their parenting plan, and I'm able to give them information to put into that plan. See what I'm saying?
Hmm.
So because obviously that parenting plan becomes a court order. Again,
Right.
that's like heading it up, getting in there at the early, kind of at the ground level. That doesn't always happen. And sometimes if I have a parenting plan that, with a resist refuse dynamic that's locked in stone, and it just doesn't seem like I'm going to be able to do it the way I think it needs to be done, I just say that. I just say I can't do it. I don't feel this is what I would need to do it. And, either they need to do it. Sometimes they'll do another, like a modification, or,
Right.
they'll put in like a reunification therapy order, like
Oh.
as an adjunct to
Oh.
the parenting
Okay.
plan. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And sometimes, you just pass, right? I just
Yeah.
pass, and the attorneys need to find somebody else. And, because I do require a lot of like front loading, because these cases need it. And I don't want to work on a case if doesn't have a good chance of succeeding.
So can you go into that front loading? What does that mean?
It means it means in more of a high, moderate, or severe case, it
Okay.
means usually assigning a parent coordinator.
Okay.
You
Parent
know,
coordinator.
you really need
Okay.
one, because you can't, if you're only doing the case as a reunification
Yeah.
therapist with no PC, you don't have the court authority to sort of really hold the parties, everybody accountable. And you're
Mhm.
creating kind of a dual role for yourself, because you're supposed to be a therapist,
Okay.
right? Kind of relationship
Right.
building
Right.
with the client, and all of a sudden you're in charge of, like, you know, making you know, recommendations to go to the next phase and all that. It really puts the therapist in a very tough position. So in a dual role. So
Yeah.
number one, PC, who knows what they're doing. Number two, you know, really some of the more well-trained psychologists now who are doing parent evals, they're actually recommending um, immediate intervention before the evaluation's done. And they will like send a letter out and say, there's a resist refuse dynamic and they need immediate intervention with you know, and they'll say it needs a PC, and the PC should be able to appoint a team of therapists. And I will be evaluating how the parties do in the intervention. And that is going to become part of my parenting evaluation.
Okay.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So when you say a team of therapists, you've got the reunification therapist, any other therapist?
Yeah, often you often both, you know, you often have a reunification therapist. Again, this is for more high, moderate to severe
Mhm.
cases. You often have a reunification therapist, and then, you know, potentially a therapist for each one of the parents
Potentially.
as
Okay.
well. It's a lot of people, and it's called a multimodal um, therapeutic intervention, and it is a lot of people and a lot of money, you know, and certainly many families cannot afford this.
Mm.
But this truly is the most successful way of intervening.
So when you have a reunification therapist, and let's say you have individual therapists for mom and dad, those individual therapists, they don't necessarily have to be trained in the parent-child contact problems.
You know, what I would say is it would help if they were,
Okay.
but normally as a PC, I can educate those therapists. I
Ah,
do like them to
okay.
have experience with family law cases, because you
Family
know
law.
that's its own, you know, thing.
Wow.
But I can usually get those therapists to move along. Before I would hand pick a therapist though for mom or dad, I would interview them and say, you know, and I would send them the AFCC guidelines, and I would
Oh,
say, this is different than traditional
wow.
therapy, because you're actually having to also take into consideration the court order that these
Wow.
parents are required to follow.
Just kind of listening, it's like so you really kind of do a lot of work in terms of the PC, the parenting coordinator. Again, like you said, you front load these cases for success. And I'm almost kind of thinking now, it would seem like when we're in this type of resist, refuse dynamics, the most important person we need to get on board is the PC, the parenting coordinator.
I think for particularly for moderate, high, moderate to severe cases, 100%. Sometimes for a mild case, you might not need one.
Yeah.
If you have a trained reunification therapist who really knows what they're doing, and if the reunification therapist requires a strong court order, you know, for example, I do take a few cases every so often as a reunification therapist for a milder case, but I require a very strong order, and I have it lay out exactly what I need from the parties. And that can help to help hold everybody accountable, a strong court order. So there is a way around the PC if it's a mild case, I would say.
Okay, and I was just thinking too, at the same time, I guess if I'm thinking in my county, we have guardian ad litems.
Yeah,
Guardian ad
yeah.
litem could essentially act as a PC.
They could, they could. And that we have done that. I have done many cases with GALs.
Okay.
And again, quite frankly, most of them don't know how to do PC, parent-child contact problem cases. They're starting to learn because the people that are doing these cases are training them, right, how to do
Right.
them. Um, they're starting to learn, um, but it's still hard. Like, you've got to get a GAL who's really willing to sort of take guidance from you, I'm usually pretty upfront about that. I say, look, are you okay with me kind of training you on these cases? Are you comfortable with me in that role as a therapist? Because really
Mhm.
there is a little hierarchy here, right, in the system. I mean, the GAL, I think, has quite a bit of power and court authority, and the court really listens to the GAL.
They
So
do.
you have to respect the hierarchy as well. It's a little bit of a,
Mm.
you're straddling politically a little bit of a thing there, if you get what I'm saying.
I do. I want to circle back to you were talking about um, I like to have a certain type of language in the court order. Can you give us an example of that?
Sure. It would state things like, the favored parent must prioritize and support the therapeutic schedule, the visits. The favored parent will actively support the reunification process. The Let's see, uh, often I will put in something like, the reunification therapist can make status reports to the GAL or the court, if necessary, something like that. Um, so yeah, things like, does that help? Those are some examples of language that I would want in my court order.
Would you also want to include something in your court order about like if the favored parent does not support the
Yeah,
process or have the
yeah.
child, what like how would you handle that situation? What kind of
Well,
language would you put in?
yeah, I mean, it's a really good one, and it's a very good one. And, I usually like to have a GAL put that in there, if they're willing to do it, or again, some of the parent evaluators are putting in there now things like, if the child does not do the visits with the
Mhm,
rejected parent,
mhm.
this may be considered a 191 restriction or for abusive conflict against the favored parent.
So that would go on the order and then the court can then decide.
Yeah, it's hard.
Okay.
I mean, I
It
don't
may be
really,
considered.
right, may be considered, again, and I'm using that language because a couple of evaluators who really understand these cases have used that language, and it has gotten transmitted into an order.
Mm.
It's a little tricky for me as a reunification therapist to put in such a strong statement like that. Of course, I have to get the attorneys to agree to that, right? And that can be tricky, right? So you know, you get it, right? It can be tricky. So, some of it is, if I'm going to take on a case as a reunification therapist, number one, I need to be supported by a GAL, right?
Okay.
Um,
Mhm.
and I need to determine if they're going to support the process.
Yeah.
And if I don't think they are, then I'm not going to take the case, right? And so, it's because they have a lot of power with the court and they have the ear of the court.
Yeah.
And I'm not bashing JLs, because I think there's some really good ones, who really do want to support the process. And it does require some GALs, they don't want to be as involved and start making demands against the favored parent if they haven't done their assessment yet, their whole, right?
Mm.
And so that's a little tricky, unless of course it's a post-decree GAL, right? So yeah, each case has to be looked at, and and kind of you do, I mean, you do the assessment and you let the GAL or the parent evaluator know what you think you need. And, you try to get, and you got to get the attorneys to agree on what you think you need. And, it's a lot, it's a process for sure.
Now, wait, did you say something like a pre-GAL?
A post
Oh,
decree. So,
oh,
if,
oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah, a post decree,
Post
a
decree, got
post decree GAL.
it.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. Would you, as a PC parenting coordinator, show up to court at a hearing with a GAL or
Yeah,
no?
sure.
Okay,
Sure.
just
Yeah.
wondering.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, can you pull up, there was something that I saw on that slide in terms of the intervention. There was
A
something,
continuum.
it was something of like one of the intervention systems for a mild case, and it said something
Yeah.
about like,
Here.
where was it? Oh, okay. So like a multi-day family intervention
Right.
for a mild and some moderate cases of rejection. Like
Yeah.
what would a multi-day family intervention look like and who would it be with?
Well, that's really exciting, question, because I actually just did I called it a family, a weekend family therapeutic retreat. Uh, and we just did one of those on a case last weekend.
Wow.
And it was actually more of a severe case, but it's the
Ah,
first time I've done that.
wow.
And I tried it because there are you know, family sort of reunification camps out there
What?
where, oh yeah, this is for very severe cases that have
Wow.
not been able to get any,
Wow.
resolved just with normal intervention. It's
Oh,
kind of a last resort.
okay.
You can actually, like, a couple names are Family Bridges is one of them, Turning Points for Families. Uh, I think there's a couple more out there, but they literally bring you the whole family. They have different combinations of how they
Okay.
do them, but in general the family goes and they are literally in a kind of this therapeutic camp with lots of providers,
Mm,
therapists for each person, plus a
wow.
reunification type. And it's very intensive. They do, this psychoeducation, all of this working with each member of the family and then bringing the family together and doing the repair work between the
Mm.
rejected parent and the child or children. And you're doing this, over the course
Whoa.
of, a long, like usually a week or 4 days. Well, in this case, we did a long, just a weekend, all day Saturday and all day Sunday, on a case that was quite severe. And I'm hoping that it helped, because what happens is, you also, part of the success of this intervention is you have to get the child exposed to the rejected parent. Some
Mm,
of this is exposure therapy because there's a lot of avoidance, and the way
yeah,
to overcome the avoidance is the exposure.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
and we did a lot of, in addition to doing just therapeutic, you know, talking about feelings, which is intense, right? We did some of that, but we also did a lot of activities for the
Oh.
family to do. For example, we did a therapeutic meal where they prepared a meal together, and, we're chopping and preparing food and working side by side. And in this case, the rejected parent and the child were working side by side, chopping,
Mm.
food for, and so we did some games, and so it was integrated with both activities and like straight kind of therapy type stuff over the weekend.
Over the weekend.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it was yourself, mom, dad, child, and anyone else?
Yeah, there was the child's therapist was there,
Okay.
and then the dad's therapist was on call.
Okay.
He couldn't come, but he was on call. So yeah, it was pretty intense. It was a lot. And, and I think some progress was made. Um and that is the first time we've tried that, but I think that's a model that we're definitely going to repeat, because I think that doing that intervention over the course of a couple days like that with that intensity can really help get you over the hump.
Yeah. What made that case a very severe case?
Well, I don't, I have to be careful. I don't want to give too
Yeah.
many
Yeah.
identifiers, but bottom line, that the child had not seen the rejected parent for about a year and a half.
Oh, okay. Okay. That makes
Yeah,
sense.
and so that and also there was a failed intervention, a
Oh,
previous
okay.
failed intervention. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
So
yeah.
you have this prolonged period of no contact with the rejected parent and a failed intervention where in my head I'm thinking, let's say like a supervised visit was scheduled and child's like, I'm not going.
Right.
Something like that.
Well, I think when I say the failed intervention, I mean there was a previous reunification therapy intervention attempted and it did not it failed. So there was already another therapist who had tried to work with this family and
Oh,
it did not work. So when
okay.
you're
Okay.
doing a trying to do an intervention on top of a failed intervention, it's very hard.
Okay.
Very, very hard. Yeah.
Now, I'm curious if that, and I'm just speaking hypothetically, if one of the reasons why that previous reunification therapy did not work was because maybe that reunification therapist was not trained in the parent-child
Ye-
contact problems.
I think that definitely
Okay.
can happen for
Okay.
sure. And I also think, to be fair, a greater percentage of these interventions do not work. You know, a great much more so than we want to it say. There, you can throw everything you
That
have
is
at it,
sad. That
and
is sad.
sometimes they still don't work. So they're very, very hard cases.
Okay.
And that's one of the things I'm putting into my court order now is like, there's just no guarantee. We can't guarantee success. And the parents go into this knowing that,
Yeah.
we try our best, but especially for a severe case, the more severe the resist refuses, the more chance you have of it just not working. Because also the court can only do so much, right? Like the court can only have so much accountability. And well, let me just show you on the severe case. I have to just decrease it, but where does it say goodbye for now? One of the recommendations for um, this child has trauma history once for one of the I don't think it's on here, but it should be. It might be somewhere, but it's just really this diagram needs to be like redone so everybody can read it. Saying goodbye for now is one of the outcomes, ultimately. Oh, here it is. I see it. Option 3 under severe case. Look at that. Rejected parent may not wish to pursue custody or access and say goodbye for now, combined with facilitating parting and a
Mm,
court-ordered framework for indirect and or potential communication. So, sometimes the court just can't handle resolve every single conflict, right, that comes into the family court system. And when you've tried everything, sometimes the rejected parent might have to say goodbye for now. And
okay.
we hate that. We hate
Yeah.
that. And it usually takes a lot to get there, quite frankly. But it is an option. And then, we help that parent write a goodbye letter
Oh,
and all of
wow.
that. Yeah.
And I want to stress that's not going to be the first option you jump to in the severe cases.
It's the
Some
very
attorney,
last,
yeah,
it's the very last
it's the
option.
last option because I can see some attorneys, sorry for my fellow litigators out there, being like, oh, okay, well, so and so said this could be an option, so let's just jump to it.
Yeah,
It's the
no,
very
no. And
last after
yeah,
everything
very
else has
last,
failed.
very
Everything else
last.
failed.
And what I will say is I think our Washington family court system really has done an excellent, excellent job of handling these cases and prioritizing the relationship that these children have with their parents. They really believe and stand behind the fact in most cases that children will do better when they have a healthy relationship with both of their parents. And the judges really have gotten behind that, and the commissioners, and I think that's good.
Can you discuss best practices for the most severe resist and refuse cases if we haven't covered that already?
We kind of have, but I'll
Okay.
summarize it.
Okay.
The severe cases need usually a PC who can support, who can handpick a team. They need uh, strong judicial oversight. They benefit from one judge having jurisdiction. They benefit from status hearings, regular status hearings. Yeah,
Okay.
that's it. Mhm.
Caroline, thank you so much for talking to us about the resist and refuse dynamics or the parent-child contact problem. What is your final thoughts on this subject? I see you have a slide pulled up.
Yes, I think my final thoughts would be it's a post-divorce conflict parenting typology by Dr. Lisa Wood, who is from the University of Washington. And I always have my parents who I'm working with on these cases look at this, because this slide shows how the characteristics of the parenting relationship post-divorce, you here have chronic high conflict, parallel cooperative and collaborative. And, obviously chronic high conflict is the worst characteristic of the co-parenting relationship after divorce. And then it slowly improves up to collaborative. And it gives you examples of what that looks like. Then here's the key. This is over here, impact on children. So a chronic high conflict dysregulated co-parenting relationship, this is how it impacts your children. They're anxious, they are distressed, self-blaming, serious psychological symptoms, difficulties with peer in school, regressed behavior, demands for indulgence, clinging or withdrawal. And and then as the parenting relationship, co-parenting relationship improves post-divorce, you can see how much better these children do when their parents are being cooperative or collaborative. So my big message at the end would be that, parents need to be able to put the past behind them or compartmentalize it, work with their own therapists, and they need to prioritize their children after they get divorced and realize that when they co-parent in a more positive way, it directly benefits their children. And when they're fighting and litigious and blaming, it dramatically hurts their children. That's my big lesson on this.
And I can't think of a better way to end this than that, Caroline. Thank you so much. It's been such a wonderful learning opportunity. I feel so blessed and privileged to have you share your wealth of experience on this subject, this very difficult subject. Thank you so much, Caroline, for coming on today.
My privilege, Lonnie. Thank you.
And thank you, those of us who joined us on the Akiona Law Family Law podcast today, wherein we spoke with Caroline Plummer, mental health counselor and parenting coordinator, where we talked about the parent-child contact problems. Until then, be well. Thank you. Thank you so much, Caroline. And I'm so
Lonnie,
sorry
enjoy
this.
Hawaii. Enjoy Hawaii. I hope the weather's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. Is it okay to use those slides when I post this episode?
Go for it.
Thank you.
Go
thank
for
you.
it.
All
Absolutely.
right. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
The information in this podcast is general advice only and should not in any respect be relied on as specific legal advice.